I'm a full-time university student, trying to balance my studies in architecture with the quiet weight of a house that suddenly feels too big for one person. This house, my childhood home, became mine under the worst circumstances imaginable. It's a legacy of love from my parents, and for a time, I thought sharing that legacy was the right thing to do. I never imagined that my generosity would be twisted into a weapon against me, or that I'd be called a guest in the very rooms where my own memories were built. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The silence was the first thing that became unbearable. After my parents were gone, the house seemed to lose its voice. It was a beautiful two-story colonial, the kind my father, a carpenter, had meticulously cared for, and my mother, a landscape artist, had surrounded with sprawling gardens of roses and hydrangeas. Every floorboard creak, every sigh of the wind through the old oak tree in the backyard, was a reminder that I was utterly alone. I was only 20 when the accident happened, and the transition from a beloved daughter to a solitary homeowner was a brutal one. Mr. Evans, my parents' longtime lawyer and friend, handled the estate with gentle efficiency. He sat with me in the large, formal dining room, papers spread across the polished wood, explaining that everything, the house, the savings, the investments, was now mine. "They wanted you to be secure, Lily," he said, his voice thick with a sadness that mirrored my own. "This house was their masterpiece. They wanted it to be your sanctuary." But a sanctuary for one felt more like a prison of memories. The scent of my mom's lavender soap still lingered in the master bathroom. My dad's worn armchair sat empty by the fireplace, a silent testament to the stories he would never again tell. I'd walk through the 4 bedrooms, my footsteps echoing, and the loneliness would be a physical ache in my chest. I was juggling a full course load, trying to stay on top of my architecture degree, but my grief was a heavy fog that made concentration impossible. The upkeep of the house was a monumental task I was failing at. Dust gathered on surfaces my mother had always kept gleaming, and the garden began to show the first signs of neglect. It was during a tearful phone call with my mother's sister, my Aunt Susan, that the idea first came up. I was describing how empty the house felt, how I was struggling to manage everything on my own. "Oh, you poor thing," she cooed, her voice dripping with sympathy. "No one your age should have to carry such a burden alone." She talked about her own family's struggles. Their landlord was selling their rented apartment, and the market was impossible. Her husband, David, was working long hours at the warehouse, and their daughter, my cousin Chloe, was trying to launch her career as a social media influencer, which apparently required a stable and aesthetically pleasing background. "It's just so stressful, Lily," she sighed. "We don't know where we'll end up." A thought, seeded by her subtle hints, began to bloom in my mind. It felt like a perfect solution, a way to fill the crushing silence and help the only family I had left. "Why don't you guys move in here with me?" I offered, the words tumbling out before I had a chance to really think them through. The silence on the other end of the line was brief, but charged. Then, an explosion of gratitude. "Lily. Are you serious?" "Oh, honey, you can't be serious. That would be a lifesaver. We wouldn't have to impose for long, just until we get back on our feet." I brushed off her talk of imposition. "It's not imposing," I insisted, a genuine warmth spreading through me for the first time in months. "There are 3 empty bedrooms. The house is too big for me. It would be nice to have family around again." We discussed the logistics. They wouldn't pay rent, I refused to even consider it. My parents' investments provided more than enough for the property taxes and bills. I just asked that they contribute to the groceries and help with the upkeep. "Of course, sweetie. We'll treat this house like it's our own palace. We'll take such good care of you," Susan promised. The day they moved in was a flurry of chaotic energy. Uncle David, a burly man with a booming laugh, directed the moving crew while Aunt Susan fluttered around, deciding where her collection of ceramic cats would go. My cousin Chloe, who was a year older than me, spent most of the day taking selfies, posing dramatically on the grand staircase and in front of my mother's prized rose bushes. "The lighting here is just epic," she declared, tapping away at her phone. "My followers are going to be so jelly." Despite her vanity, the noise and activity felt like a balm on my grieving soul. The house felt alive again. That evening, for the first time since my parents passed, we all had dinner together at the big dining table. David told a series of cheesy jokes that made me laugh, and Susan served a casserole that, while not as good as my mom's, was made with care. For the first few months, it was exactly what I had hoped for. Susan took over the kitchen, filling the house with the smells of baking. David was handy, fixing a leaky faucet in the guest bathroom and finally getting the garage door opener to work consistently. Even Chloe was helpful in her own way, her constant live streaming and chatter providing a steady hum of background noise that kept the silence at bay. They praised my generosity endlessly. "You're an angel, Lily." "A true angel," Susan would say, pulling me into a hug. "We were so blessed to have you in this time of need." They were careful, too, always asking before they moved a piece of furniture or hung a picture. I felt like I was part of a family again, and the fog of my grief began to lift. I could focus on my studies, and I started to feel a semblance of normalcy return. I truly believed I had done the right thing, offering my sanctuary as a shared haven for the people I loved. I had no idea that I hadn't just invited them into my home, I had invited them to begin the slow, methodical process of erasing me from it. The shift was gradual, a subtle change in the atmosphere of the house, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. It wasn't one single event, but a series of small, almost imperceptible encroachments. It began with the living room. My mother had decorated it in soft blues and creams, a tranquil space filled with books and art. One afternoon, I came home from a long day of classes to find the room transformed. The cream-colored sofa had been draped with a loud, leopard print throw, and a collection of gaudy, rhinestone-studded pillows were scattered across it. My mother's delicate watercolor paintings had been replaced by a series of framed, filtered photos of Chloe posing in various outfits. I stood in the doorway, my backpack sliding from my shoulder. What happened in here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. Susan emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Oh. Do you like it?" Chloe and I thought the room needed a bit of a modern touch. A little more personality, you know? It was all a bit drab before. She beamed at me, oblivious to the stone that had just dropped in my stomach. Drab? My mother's taste was classic, elegant. This was chaotic. I didn't want to cause a conflict, so I forced a weak smile. "It's different. Just a bit of a surprise." Susan patted my arm. "Don't you worry, sweetie. We're just making the place feel a little more like home for all of us." The phrase "for all of us" became a quiet refrain, a justification for every change they made without consulting me. My dad's armchair, his sacred space, was moved from its place by the fireplace to a dusty corner in the upstairs hallway to make room for a giant, 70-inch television David had bought on Black Friday. When I tried to protest, gently explaining the chair's sentimental value, David just laughed. "Come on, Lilypad. You gotta be practical. This is the perfect spot for the TV. We can't all live in the past." They started hosting parties without asking me first. I would come home from the university library late at night to a house full of their friends, loud music shaking the windows, and strangers drinking from my parents' wedding china. When I would retreat to my room, overwhelmed, Susan would later tell me I needed to loosen up and be more social. Then came the whispers. I'd walk into a room and the conversation would abruptly stop. I'd hear my name mentioned in hushed tones from behind a closed door. It was Chloe and her mother, their voices low and conspiratorial. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid, that my grief was making me overly sensitive. But then I started to catch snippets of their conversations. "She's just so quiet all the time, hiding away in her room. "It's a little strange," I heard Susan say to one of her friends on the phone. "It's a big house for a student who doesn't even have a job. We're really doing her a favor by being here, keeping the place from falling apart." Doing me a favor? The words stung. I was the one paying the mortgage, the insurance, the utilities. My student loans were piling up, but I never touched the core of my inheritance, the money my parents had set aside for my future. I was living frugally, eating instant noodles in my room some nights so I wouldn't be a bother, while they were feasting on expensive steaks David would grill in the backyard. The small contributions to groceries they had promised had dwindled to nothing. I'd buy a week's worth of food, only to find the fridge empty 2 days later, with Chloe's half-finished, expensive smoothies taking up an entire shelf. The most painful part was how they began to speak about my parents. They'd refer to my mother's garden as that overgrown mess out back and my father's workshop in the garage as a waste of good storage space. It was as if they were systematically trying to erase the memory of the people who had built this home, replacing it with their own loud, garish existence. Chloe was the most brazen. She took over the master bathroom, the one attached to my parents' old room which I had kept locked and untouched. I found out when I saw her doing a Get Ready With Me live stream, sitting at my mother's vanity, using her silver-backed brushes as props. I confronted her, my voice shaking with anger. "Chloe, what are you doing? You know that room is off limits." She rolled her eyes, not even bothering to look away from her phone's screen. "Oh, chill out, Lily. It's the only bathroom with decent lighting. Besides, it's not like they're using it. It's just sitting here collecting dust." Her callousness was a physical blow. She didn't see a memorial, she saw an asset. A backdrop. That night, I locked myself in my own bedroom, the one I'd had since I was a child, and it no longer felt like my sanctuary. It felt like the last tiny island of my existence in a house that was being flooded by strangers. I could hear them downstairs, laughing at the new TV. Their laughter wasn't a comfort anymore. It was the sound of my own home being stolen from me, one room at a time, and the whispers were becoming the new, unbearable silence. The breaking point, the moment their carefully constructed masks of gratitude and family affection didn't just slip but were torn off completely, came during Chloe's 22nd birthday party. It wasn't the party itself that was the problem, though the fact that they had planned a massive backyard barbecue with 50 guests without so much as mentioning it to me was insulting enough. I found out when a truck arrived to deliver a bouncy castle for the lawn, nearly flattening a bed of my mother's prize-winning irises. When I questioned Susan about it, she waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, don't be a spoilsport, Lily. It's for Chloe's birthday. We wanted to do something special for her. You know how hard she's working on her brand." I bit my tongue, the familiar burn of resentment rising in my throat. I decided to make myself scarce, hiding in my room with my textbooks, trying to study for my midterms. But the bass from the speakers they'd set up on the patio vibrated through the floorboards, making it impossible to concentrate. After hours of trying to ignore the chaos, I gave up and went downstairs to get a glass of water. The house was packed with Chloe's and Susan's friends, none of whom I recognized. The air was thick with the smell of cheap beer and smoke. As I squeezed through the crowd towards the kitchen, I overheard a conversation that stopped me cold. It was Susan, talking to a woman I'd never seen before. The woman was admiring the house. "Susan, this place is absolutely gorgeous. You guys are so lucky to have found it." My aunt let out a theatrical sigh, placing a hand on her chest. "Oh, it's been a struggle, I'll tell you. A real labor of love." The woman looked confused. "A struggle? What do you mean?" Susan leaned in, her voice dropping to a confidential, pitying tone. "Well, you know, my poor brother and his wife, bless their souls, they passed away last year. They weren't very financially responsible. They left my niece, Lily, with this huge, crumbling house and a mountain of debt." My blood turned to ice. A mountain of debt? The house was paid off. My parents were the most responsible people I knew. We had to step in, of course, Susan continued, her voice radiating false martyrdom. David and we took over the mortgage payments and we've been fixing the place up little by little. We let Lily stay here, naturally. She's a student, with no job. Where else would the poor girl go? It's a huge financial burden on us, but what can you do? She's family. She then added the line that shattered the last bit of my composure. Honestly, some days it feels like we're running a charity, letting a freeloader stay in our house. But we do it with a smile. Freeloader. The word echoed in the sudden silence of my mind. It was so vile, so profoundly untrue, that I couldn't even process it at first. I was standing in the hallway of the house my parents had left to me, the house that was legally and entirely mine, being described as a charity case to a group of strangers. I felt a surge of hot, white-hot anger, something I hadn't felt since the day I learned my parents were gone. It was so powerful it made me tremble. I pushed my way through the crowd and stood directly in front of her. "What did you just say?" My voice was dangerously quiet, but it cut through the noise around us. Susan's eyes widened in shock, her face paling. The woman she was talking to looked back and forth between us, suddenly uncomfortable. "Lily." We were just talking," Susan stammered, trying to recover. "No," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I heard what you said. You're telling people you pay the mortgage on this house? You're telling them I'm a freeloader?" David and Chloe, drawn by the sudden tension, had come over. David put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Hey now, Lilypad, it's a party. Let's not make a scene." I shook his hand off. "A scene? Your wife is lying to people, telling them you own my parents' house." It was Chloe who delivered the final, devastating blow. She stepped forward, her face twisted into a contemptuous sneer. "Oh my God, stop being so dramatic. So what if Mom fudged a few details? It's embarrassing to have to tell people we're living off the charity of our little student cousin. We're the adults here. We're the ones making this house a home, not you, hiding in your room all day like some kind of ghost. You don't do anything. You don't contribute. You are a freeloader." That was it. The mask was gone. In its place was raw, ugly entitlement. They didn't see my offer as a kindness. They saw it as their due. They had not just moved into my home, in their minds, they had conquered it. They had rewritten history, casting themselves as saviors and me as the pathetic, burdensome waif they had graciously taken in. The crowd was staring now, their whispers replacing the music. I looked at the three of them, Susan's feigned innocence, David's blustering attempt at control, and Chloe's undisguised scorn. They were not my family. They were invaders. I didn't say another word. I turned around, walked through the sea of curious faces, went up the stairs to my room and locked the door. The party raged on below, but for me, it was over. The war had just begun. The next morning, the house was a disaster zone of red plastic cups, overflowing trash bags, and the stale smell of old beer. My aunt's family moved through the wreckage with a sluggish, hungover indifference, making no effort to clean up. They acted as if the confrontation from the night before had never happened, offering me cheerful good mornings that I met with stony silence. Their denial was more infuriating than an apology would have been. It was clear they believed my anger was a temporary tantrum I would simply get over. They had underestimated me. The shock and rage had solidified into something cold and hard in my chest, resolve. I packed a small overnight bag, grabbed my laptop, and left the house without a word. My first and only destination was the office of Mr. Evans. His law firm was in a quiet, distinguished downtown building, a world away from the chaos of my home. His secretary showed me in immediately, and Mr. Evans greeted me with a concerned look. He had known me since I was a baby, he could read my face like a book. "Lily," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "You look like you've seen a ghost. What's wrong?" The moment I sat down, the floodgates opened. I told him everything. I told him about the offer, their initial gratitude, and the slow, insidious takeover of my home. I told him about the whispers, the lies, and the final, crushing insults from the night before. I recounted Susan's speech about paying the mortgage and Chloe's accusation that I was a freeloader. As I spoke, Mr. Evans's expression shifted from paternal concern to a quiet, simmering fury. He steepled his fingers, his gaze sharp and focused. He didn't interrupt me once. When I finished, the silence in his office was profound. "Lily," he said, his voice calm but laced with steel. "First, let me be unequivocally clear. You are the sole and legal owner of that property. The deed is in your name. The trust your parents established covers all taxes and insurance in perpetuity. There is no mortgage. The house has been owned outright by your family for over 50 years. What your aunt told her friends was not a white lie or a fudged detail, it was slander and a complete fabrication." He leaned forward. "And you are not a freeloader. You are a homeowner being taken advantage of by opportunistic relatives. What they are doing is, at its core, a form of emotional and financial abuse." Hearing him state it so plainly validated everything I had been feeling. I wasn't being dramatic. I wasn't being overly sensitive. I was being victimized. "What do I do, Mr. Evans?" I asked, my voice small. "They're my only family." He gave me a sad smile. "Sometimes, the family you are born with is not the family that has your best interests at heart. As your lawyer, I advise you to protect your assets and your well-being. As a friend of your parents, I advise you to protect their legacy." He stood up and walked over to a large filing cabinet. "The first step is to gather information. We need to understand the full scope of their deception." He outlined a plan. He would pull copies of all the official documents, the deed, the will, the trust statements, to have a file ready. My job was more clandestine. He advised me to go back to the house and act as though I was willing to forgive and forget, but to become an observer. A quiet investigator in my own home. "Pay attention to the mail," he instructed. "See if they have had any bills or official documents redirected to this address. Check the utility bills, water, electricity, internet. See if the usage has skyrocketed. Document every change they make to the house, every expense you are covering, every time they overstep. Keep a journal. Dates, times, quotes. Be meticulous." He also suggested I install security cameras. "For your own protection," he said. "Public-facing areas only, the living room, the kitchen, the entryway. It is your property, you are legally entitled to know what happens within it." I felt a surge of purpose. I was no longer a passive victim of their entitlement, I was a quiet force gathering evidence. I went online and ordered a set of discreet, high-quality security cameras that looked like smoke detectors and phone chargers. I spent 2 nights at a friend's apartment, waiting for them to be delivered to a neutral location. When I returned home, I put on my best apologetic face. I told Susan I had overreacted, that I was just stressed from my studies. The relief on her face was palpable. She hugged me, patting my back. "I knew you'd come around, sweetie. We're all just one big, happy family, after all." Over the next 2 weeks, I played my part. During the day, while they were out or preoccupied with Chloe's endless photo shoots, I installed the cameras. I set them up to feed directly to a secure cloud service I could access from my phone or laptop. Then, I began to watch, and what I found was worse than I could have imagined. I saw them mocking me behind my back, calling me Princess Lily in her ivory tower, my bedroom. I watched them rifle through my parents' desks and keepsake boxes when they thought I wasn't home. The utility bills were astronomical, they were leaving lights on, running the air conditioning at full blast 24/7, and Chloe was taking hour-long showers multiple times a day. The real bombshell came from the mail. A letter arrived from a luxury car dealership addressed to David. Thinking it was junk mail, I almost threw it out, but my curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. It was a financing agreement for a brand new, top-of-the-line SUV. On the application, under his address, he had listed my home. But under housing status, he had checked the box for owner. He had used my house, my address, as collateral proof of stability to secure a massive loan for a car they couldn't possibly afford on their salaries. He was committing fraud using my inheritance. I downloaded the footage from the cameras and made copies of the utility bills and the fraudulent car loan application. I compiled everything into a neat, damning digital file. My journal was filled with pages of their insults, their demands, their blatant disrespect. The investigation was over. It was time to build the case for their eviction. With the evidence compiled into a folder that felt as heavy as a gravestone, I returned to Mr. Evans's office. We sat at his large conference table, and I plugged my laptop into the overhead projector. One by one, I showed him everything. I played the video clips of Susan telling Chloe not to worry about the electricity bill because Lily's trust fund can handle it. I showed him the footage of David bragging to a friend on the phone about how he basically owned this mansion now. I presented the fraudulent car loan application and the utility bills that had tripled in the past 6 months. Mr. Evans watched it all with a grim, tight-lipped expression. He didn't look surprised, merely disappointed in the depths of human greed. When I was finished, he took off his glasses and polished them slowly. "Well," he said, his voice a low rumble. "They have not only violated your trust, Lily, they have broken the law. The loan application is fraud. Their use of your home as a basis for that fraud is a serious offense." He put his glasses back on, his eyes sharp. "This makes our next steps much simpler and much more justified." I had imagined a dramatic, tear-filled confrontation, a messy fight that would end with me screaming at them to get out. But Mr. Evans proposed a different path. A quiet, methodical, and legally airtight one. "We are not going to engage in a screaming match," he explained. "That is what they want. They would twist it, play the victims, and try to manipulate you. We are going to remove their power base, which is the house itself, through official, undeniable channels. We will treat this not as a family dispute, but as a landlord-tenant issue, even though they have paid no rent." Our plan had several phases. The first was to formally establish their status as tenants at will. Mr. Evans drafted a simple, one-page document. It was a lease agreement, backdated to the day they moved in. It stated that they were occupying the premises with my permission, with zero rent due, and that all utilities were my responsibility. It seemed counterintuitive at first. Why would I sign something that made it seem even more official? Because, Mr. Evans explained, this document explicitly defines their position. They are not owners. They are not squatters. They are tenants, which gives you, the landlord, a clear legal path to terminate that tenancy. The next part of the plan was the most difficult for me emotionally. I had to get them to sign it. Mr. Evans coached me on the approach. I was to present it not as a legal document, but as a formality. "Tell them your financial advisor for the trust needs it for tax purposes," he suggested. A simple paper to show who is officially residing in the house. Keep it casual. Don't make it a big deal. That evening, I approached them after dinner. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but I kept my voice light. "Hey guys, sorry to bother you with boring paperwork," I started, holding out the papers and a pen. "My trust manager needs a form signed, just listing who lives here for the homeowner's insurance records. It's just a formality." David barely glanced at it, too engrossed in the game on his new TV. Yeah, whatever." "Where do I sign?" he grumbled, scrawling his signature without reading a single word. Susan was a bit more suspicious. She read the first line. "Lease agreement?" she asked, her brow furrowing. I held my breath. "It's just the standard form they use," I said breezily. "It just confirms you're living here without having to pay rent, so it doesn't look like I'm hiding undeclared income or anything. It actually protects you guys." The mention of it protecting them seemed to satisfy her. She signed her name and passed the paper to Chloe, who signed it while simultaneously taking a selfie. I took the signed document, my hands trembling slightly, and went back to my room. I had it. Their legal status was now sealed. They were officially tenants with no lease term. The final piece of the plan was the eviction notice itself. In our state, a tenancy at will could be terminated with 30 days written notice. Mr. Evans drafted the notice. It was cold, formal, and brutal in its simplicity. It stated that their tenancy at the property was terminated and that they had 30 days to vacate the premises entirely. There was no room for argument. It wasn't a request, it was a legal order. He also drafted a separate, more personal letter for me to give them, explaining my reasons, so they couldn't claim they were blindsided. But this letter was for my own peace of mind, not a legal necessity. For the next week, I lived in a state of quiet dread and anticipation. I continued to play my part, eating meals with them, nodding along to their chatter, all while the signed lease agreement and the eviction notice sat in a secure file in Mr. Evans's office. I was no longer just Lily, the grieving student. I was the quiet architect of their downfall, meticulously laying the foundation for their removal. I documented their every transgression, saved every piece of damning video footage, and prepared myself for the day the hammer would fall. I was taking back my home, not with yelling and tears, but with signatures, statutes, and the undeniable power of the law. The thought was terrifying, but it was also the first time in a long time that I felt a flicker of my old self, a spark of the strength I thought had died with my parents. The day I chose was a Saturday. I wanted them all to be home. I wanted them to face this together, with no chance for one of them to run off and craft a separate narrative. Mr. Evans had advised me to have a third party present to witness the serving of the notice, and he had offered to be there himself. His calm, authoritative presence, I knew, would be an invaluable shield. At 10 in the morning, his polished sedan pulled into the driveway. I met him at the door, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. He gave me a reassuring nod. "Ready, Lily?" I took a deep breath. "As I'll ever be." We walked into the living room. David was splayed on the couch watching a sports recap show on the giant TV. Chloe was at the dining table, editing a video on her laptop, and Susan was in the kitchen, humming along to the radio. The scene was so domestically normal it was surreal. Our entrance broke the spell. David muted the TV and sat up, a look of annoyance on his face. "Hey, what's going on?" Susan came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands. Her smile faltered when she saw Mr. Evans. "Mr. Evans? Is everything all right?" "Susan, David, Chloe," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "Please, have a seat. There's something we need to discuss." I gestured to the armchairs. They exchanged confused glances but sat down, a tangible sense of unease filling the room. Mr. Evans stood silently beside me, a manila folder in his hand. I was the one who had to speak. "For the last year, I've opened my home to you," I said, looking each of them in the eye. "I did it because I loved you, because you're my family, and because I thought we could support each other. But I have come to realize that our arrangement is not healthy, and it's not sustainable." Susan started to protest. "Lily, honey, what are you talking about? Everything is fine." I held up a hand, stopping her. "No, it's not fine. It's not fine that you tell people you own this house and that you're supporting me. It's not fine that you've shown no respect for my parents' memory or for me. And it is certainly not fine," I added, my gaze locking onto David, "that you've used my home to commit loan fraud." The color drained from David's face. Chloe's jaw dropped. Susan just stared, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Mr. Evans chose that moment to step forward. He opened the folder and placed 3 documents on the coffee table in front of them. "This," he said, tapping the top page, "is a formal notice to quit. As per the tenancy at will agreement you all signed last week, Your residency at this property is hereby terminated. You have 30 days from today to vacate the premises." For a moment, there was complete silence. They all stared at the paper as if it were written in a foreign language. David was the first to explode. He shot to his feet, his face turning a blotchy red. "What is this nonsense? Tenancy agreement? We never signed any lease." Mr. Evans calmly produced the document they had all signed, with their signatures clear as day. "You may not have read it, Mr. Smith, but you certainly signed it." Susan's demeanor shifted from confusion to frantic pleading. She turned to me, her eyes welling with tears. "Lily, baby, you can't do this to us. We're family. Where will we go? We have nothing." "You should have thought of that before you called me a freeloader in my own home," I replied, my voice cold. "You should have thought of that before you lied and said you were paying a mortgage that doesn't exist." Then came Chloe's turn. Her reaction was pure, unadulterated rage. "You ungrateful little witch," she shrieked, jumping up from her chair. "After everything we've done for you. We made this boring old house fun. We gave you a life. You're just kicking us out onto the street because your feelings got hurt?" "You're being asked to leave," Mr. Evans interjected, his voice firm and unwavering, "because you have been deceitful, disrespectful, and have exploited the generosity of your niece. And that is before we even discuss the matter of the fraudulent loan application, which the bank might be very interested in seeing." That threat hung in the air, a final, unassailable checkmate. David sank back onto the couch, defeated. The fight went out of them, replaced by a stunned, ugly silence. They finally understood. This wasn't a negotiation. There was no argument they could win. They had been outmaneuvered, legally and completely. The 30 days passed in a blur of toxic tension. They barely spoke to me, communicating only in slammed doors and resentful glares. They made a show of packing, dragging it out, making as much noise and mess as possible. Chloe posted vague, dramatic stories online about being betrayed by family, and I saw a few of her friends leave angry comments on my social media profiles, which I promptly blocked. They didn't try to apologize. They didn't try to make amends. Their entitlement remained intact to the very end. On the final day, I watched from the living room window as they loaded the last of their boxes into a rented truck. The garish, leopard print throw was one of the last things to go. When the truck finally pulled away, taking them out of my driveway and out of my life, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I just felt a profound, aching sense of relief. The house was silent again. But this time, it wasn't the silence of grief. It was the silence of peace. In the immediate aftermath of their departure, the house felt cavernous, like a battlefield after the fighting has stopped. Every room held an echo of their presence. The faint smell of Chloe's cloying perfume in the hallway, a scuff mark on the wall where David had carelessly moved a piece of furniture, the kitchen counters cleared of Susan's clutter. For the first few days, I walked through the rooms as if I were a visitor, half expecting to hear the boom of the TV or the sound of Chloe's voice from her bedroom. The silence I had once craved now felt heavy with the ghosts of the past year. The process of reclaiming my home began not with a celebration, but with a deep, thorough cleansing. I opened every window, letting the fresh autumn air chase out the stale energy that had settled in the walls. I gathered every item they had left behind, a stray sock, a cheap magazine, a half-empty bottle of ketchup, and threw it all into a large trash bag. It was a purge, a ritual to remove every last trace of their occupancy. I stripped the beds in their former rooms, washing the linens on the hottest setting, as if I could scald away the memory of them sleeping there. The living room was my first major project. I took down Chloe's framed selfies, the nail holes in the wall like tiny wounds. I carefully unwrapped my mother's watercolor paintings from the bubble wrap I'd stored them in and hung them back in their rightful places. The soft blues and greens of the landscapes were like a balm to my soul. I folded the leopard print throw they had conveniently forgotten and placed it in a donation box. Then, I dragged my dad's armchair from its dusty corner in the hallway and returned it to its hallowed spot beside the fireplace. I sank into its worn leather, the familiar contours a comforting embrace. It felt like coming home. Cleaning out my father's workshop was an emotional task. They had used it as a dumping ground for things they didn't want in the house. It was filled with broken electronics, old clothes, and boxes of junk. It took me an entire weekend, but as I cleared away their rubbish, I began to uncover my dad's world. His neatly organized tools, his half-finished projects, the faint smell of sawdust that I had always associated with him. I found a small, intricately carved wooden bird he had been working on, and I sat on his stool and cried, not just from grief, but from gratitude that I had saved this space from their desecration. Slowly but surely, I began to make the house my own again, but it was a different kind of ownership now. Before, it was a place defined by my parents. Now, it had to be a place defined by me. I was studying architecture, so I began to see the house not just as a collection of memories, but as a space with potential. I painted my bedroom a calming shade of green. I rearranged the furniture in the study to create a more functional workspace for my projects. I started small, but each change was an assertion of my presence, my taste, my future. The garden was my final frontier. It had become overgrown during the months of their neglect. I spent weeks weeding, pruning, and planting new bulbs. Working with the soil, feeling the sun on my back, I felt a connection to my mother, but I also felt a sense of my own power, the ability to cultivate beauty and life from a neglected patch of earth. I saw Mr. Evans a few weeks later for a final meeting. He informed me that David and Susan had moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. He had also, with my permission, sent a discreet, anonymous letter to the fraud department of the bank that had issued David's car loan, along with a copy of the application. He didn't know what would come of it, but he felt it was the right thing to do. We both knew I would likely never speak to my aunt's family again. The familial bond had been irrevocably broken, and while there was a sadness in that, there was also a profound sense of liberation. I had learned a hard lesson, that blood does not automatically grant loyalty or love, and that a home is not just a structure of wood and nails, but a sanctuary that must be protected, sometimes even from those you are supposed to trust. Today, the house is quiet again. But it's a good quiet. It's the sound of pages turning as I study, the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the chirping of birds in the reclaimed garden. It is a silence filled not with loneliness, but with potential. I have friends over for dinner, and we fill the rooms with laughter, our laughter. The house is no longer a monument to my past or a prison of my grief. It is my sanctuary, my project, and the foundation upon which I am building my own future, on my own terms. I am not a freeloader. I am the lady of the house. And finally, I am at peace.